Welcome to Tamer Bowling Video Ball Reviews. If you like what we do, please support us by joining our Patreon page. All right, welcome back, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Today, I'm going to spend a little time with our friend James.
Hello, hello.
Kniffen or
Yep,
Kniffen?
Kniffen. Yep, Kniffen. You got it right.
So I had spent some time talking about my arsenal. We just got done with the video with Brian, lower rev bowler. And so I wanted to talk through a little bit of our concept of the high rev bowler. James and I initially connected on through Patreon. I know he'd been looking at some of the videos for a while, and he's definitely a very active person in the community, both with Discord and the bowling community in general. And so, actually, James also recently did a sort of what are called remote video for us with the Gravity Evolve.
Yep.
So yeah, James, why don't you just take a moment, introduce yourself with the bowler?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as Tamer said, hi, I'm James. Some of you that hang out in Luke Rosedal's live streams might better know me as Shimwrecker Enterprises. I was fortunate enough to win a staff contract with Storm Bowling through the end of 2020. Won that last summer and have been striking a ton with that ever since then. Actually, to the point that I am currently, if you can see that, I'm the UBA Southeast Heavyweight Champion right now.
Nice.
So basically, it's an individual ranking series that the UBA runs in addition to their normal monthly tour stop events. And so I'm actually undefeated in the series right now for the Southeast region. So I joined last year and worked my way up, and I've held the belt since November. So a lot of my bowling that I actually do on a regular basis is on house shot. There's not a whole lot of sport shot tournaments and leagues around here, and what is there doesn't really have a whole lot of money involved. So I figure I can have more fun and make more money bowling on house shots. So that's what I focus on for the most part. Although I do kind of dabble in some sport shots when the time comes.
So you're the kind of bowler that the reason why I don't bowl house shots, right? House shot tournaments,
Yeah, probably.
Back in like 250 averages now.
Yeah.
But no, that's awesome. I actually just joined the UBA myself, but haven't been able to bowl anything since
Okay.
we had the shutdown. So
Yeah, there is that. It's funny that we actually had our big spring event was in Richmond, Virginia, kind of the weekend before everything really started to shut down.
Yeah.
And so coming back from that, there were definitely some concerns around, COVID-19 and all that stuff. So
Right.
thankfully there has been very minimal impact from that event happening kind of when it did. But
Yeah.
the last shot I threw for score was at that event.
Yeah.
And I haven't done a shot since. So it's been 3 weeks now.
I mean, I guess we're here. We'll just keep talking about bowling until we get past this. So.
Pretty much, yeah.
So I'm going to remind people just briefly about the concept that it put together around arsenal building, right? So again, we were talking about in a simplistic form, 6 balls, more or less, give or take, and we sort of organize that as strong defined, strong control motion, mid defined, mid control, mid late, and then finally a kind of weak or wild card or spare ball, whatever you fit in there. So I think you and I have talked before. We're pretty aligned on the concept. Is there anything you sort of want to add there before we jump into the balls themselves?
Not really. I do think, and I know you and I have talked about this. It's like this whole concept of these different archetypes of ball motion. They provide a little more latitude to construct an arsenal that is ideal for the bowler at hand. So, like building for someone like you, left-handed tweener, about a 350-ish rev rate, is going to look very different than for someone like me, where I'm like 20, 21 miles an hour off the hand, a 500 rev rate, and I'm a righty, and I tend to see some pretty high friction centers with where I'm bowling. So it's arsenal building all comes back to the bowler, to how the bowler likes to approach the lanes and to the conditions you're seeing. And I think that'll kind of manifest itself through a few of the choices that I've made that'll kind of contrast themselves a little bit.
Yep. All right, good. So then why don't we jump in then to what your arsenal looks like? So how do you match up those 6 balls?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned, I'm on staff with Storm right now. So all of my arsenal is going to be Storm and Rotogrip products. My strong defined ball is going to be an Omega Crux from Storm. The strong controlled, I just drilled it like a week before everything shut down, but the Storm Axiom has absolutely blown me away since I drilled it. So that's definitely in my strong control slot. Mid defined is probably one of my favorite shiny ASIMs ever, and that is the Storm Astrophysics. Then we have the mid control, which is a little bit different. And this is kind of one of those changes I was talking about. We can talk more about it later, but it's an IQ Emerald at, I think I have a 2000 grit surface on it right now, give or take. So a little bit of surface on it to make it dig a little more, but still kind of in that same archetype. And then my medium late ball is a Rotogrip Hustle Ink, which I absolutely love. And then I don't really have a need for a weak ball on house shot most of the time, and I'm much better shooting spares of plastic. So a plastic spare ball goes in as my sixth slot.
Okay. All right. So that get to recap for people, we've got the Omega Crux, the Axiom. Again, these are all Storm or Rotogrip balls because you're on staff. Then you have the Astrophysics in your mid-defined, IQ Emerald with some surface in your mid-control. Your mid-late's a Hustle Ink with, I think that one's out shiny.
Yep, that's factory polish. Yep.
And then basically there is no weak ball, so to speak. It's a spare ball.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So all right, good. So let's start from the top then and talk through each of these categories and how often what the balls look like, how often you get to use them, maybe layouts and so on. So starting with the Omega Crux, which is your sort of strong defined ball.
Yep.
Let's talk a little bit about that. I guess I don't know if you have any comments about your layout. I'm assuming surface probably still more or less out of box, or at least with
Surface is actually a little more than factory on that ball. I think I have it at 2000 right now, and factory, if I remember correctly, is 3000.
3,000 something like
Yeah,
that.
so it's I especially for my strong defined ball, I'm always very intentional about keeping that with pretty fresh surface on it, because with how I see ball motion and how much ball speed I have, if I can't see my ball like reading the lane and slowing down properly, then I essentially short circuit mentally, for lack of a better term. And
Right.
so being able to have that ball where, okay, nothing else is picking up, so I can go to this and I know it will read. That's definitely a kind of a safety blanket for me. So that's why I have a little more surface on it. The layout on my Omega Crux is pretty standard for me. It's 50 by 5 by 45, I believe. It puts the pin above my middle finger with the mass bias kicked about 2 inches right of my thumb.
Yeah.
Um, kind of medium to medium strong, but still pretty neutral in all aspects. Really, I'm a big fan of that layout and use it a lot,
Yeah.
just because it kind of lets the natural attributes of the ball shine through.
Right.
So it makes my sequencing a little easier to manage.
Yeah.
Um, Before I had the Omega Crux, I was throwing the physics a lot in that slot. I actually have that. The one I was throwing late last year, I think, was 55 by 4.5 by 70 with a double thumb weight hole. So that was definitely a little more trying to make it a little rollier, but still kind of embrace that more responsive big ball type of motion.
Mhm.
Um, and with my rev, especially with my rev rate, I don't really have a need for that true snow tire type ball. Like I know Brian mentioned he carries a Halo around, and yeah,
Yeah.
I'm drawing a blank on your bag, but I think you have something similar in that slot. Maybe the UFO, I think.
UFO. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't tend to need that much of a snow tire very often, because if I do, the ball reaction is going to be gone in a game anyways.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I mean, it's an interesting point because I know even Brian and I both never get to use those balls on house shots,
yeah,
right? So for,
yeah,
for that being said, I mean, for me, essentially, that's probably doesn't come with me. I mean, it may if I just want to fill the bag with a boat anchor, just because I know I'm not going to get to use it, right?
yeah,
No offense to the ball itself, it's just we don't see that kind of volume a lot of times on house shots.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, and actually, I wanted to kind of ask you a little bit. So having the Omega Crux, or even the physics before that, how often do you really get to use that?
It it varies depending on the house, honestly. The way I tend to use that big snow tire, like strong defined type of ball motion, is when there's a really pronounced puddle in the middle of the lane. I need something to be able to really chew through that
Mm,
and still create some positive traction even through higher volumes of oil. So like my home center, I'm throwing in astrophysics most of the time
yeah.
because it's a longer house shot, not a ton of volume.
Right.
The other center where I bowl league is wood lanes and not a ton of volume either, so I never need that big sanded ASIM shape. But when I'm traveling around to tournaments, I mean, with between UBA and tournaments, I've literally bowled in 30 plus centers since the start of 2019. So it's not a ball that I'm going to necessarily need a ton, but there are a few centers where, if I'm walking in blind or I know that it's a, higher volume center, having something like the Omega Crux or like a physics is really an incredibly useful bailout tool to
Right.
have that'll give me, 230 or 240 when I might not be able to get that with anything else in my bag.
Right. And the other thing I just want to hit on quickly is you mentioned about surface. And the thing I just want to remind bowlers, because I think it's something that's neglected quite often, um, how to use surface.
Yeah,
And, while I think most bowlers just take the ball as soon as it's drilled up, take it to the lanes. If it's shiny out of the box, they're basically throwing it the way it is. If it's dull out of the box, they're throwing it the way it is. Eventually,
yeah,
everything lane shines. Everything kind of looks that same sort of sheen that if you put on that Jayhawk probably comes out to like 53, 5,500
yeah,
grit. Um, but at the end of the day, balls do will shine up quickly.
yeah,
And just to your point about keeping it fresh, every time you throw a game, if you're putting that ball back in your bag and you want 2000, you
yeah,
better touch it with 2000 again, or it's not 2000 anymore. I don't think people realize
yeah,
how quickly things, balls surface changes.
yeah, absolutely. And
Um,
as a couple of sanding pads is one of the things that's indispensable in my backpack for that very reason.
yeah,
Is making sure that even like let's say I'll walk into the bowling alley and I'm like, oh, my Omega Crux is looking a little shiny. Let me grab a 2000 pad. It's not shiny anymore.
right.
So that kind of having that. And I try to not overthink my surfaces too much. Like
Yeah.
everything that I have is either factory surface or fairly close to it, except for the emerald, of course.
Mhm.
But it's still kind of making sure not necessarily everything is perfect, but that I have a good sequence in place. Like I'll have a couple balls that create a lot of positive traction if I need it. Then I'll have one or two kind of in the middle, and then one that's really clean for if the lanes are hooking a lot more.
Yeah.
And so just making sure that I have that top to bottom stack in terms of how much you're going to read friction versus oil and how much traction they're actually going to create.
Wow. Wow. Okay. All right. So I think as we're still talking about traction, let's go to the next category, which is the strong control, and that's that storm axiom you have. So maybe
Yep.
tell us a little bit about that one.
Yeah. So it's a new cover and a new core from Storm. So the cover's called Nano Extreme. It's basically NRG solid on steroids, which is actually the ball's a little more responsive down lane than I expected,
Yeah.
knowing what kind of the pedigree of that cover was, for lack of a better term. And it's got a really big low RG, high differential symmetric core. Um, honestly, I think this is probably a pretty good comparison. It feels like an idle that's a little bit punchier down lane for me. Um, definitely provides a lot of traction, a good amount of traction in oil, but also I don't have to worry about getting it to the friction a little early and having it roll out
Yeah.
as much as that strong defined type of shape. So it's anything from wood lanes to synthetics with a flood of oil on them. It's actually been in play and really impressed me with the range of use that it has. And I think that's, if I could pin one attribute on this particular slot above all others, is make sure that it's a ball you're really comfortable with and that gives you a really wide range of use and a lot of control. Because that I think that's something a lot of house shot bowlers especially kind of tend to overlook, is that comfort pick that'll keep you out of trouble and keep you in play above all else. And that's, whether it's an axiom or I've thrown the phase two a ton the past 3 years
Yeah.
in this same kind of role,
Yeah.
is, one of those two. They're really comfort picks for me and just get the job done.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. I mean, I think what you said about the axiom is kind of what I saw in the test. And I did mention that honestly, I wouldn't mind filling this slot with axiom or phase two. I like them
Yeah.
both equally. I happen
Yep.
to have the phase two in there right now because I still really like that ball. You know?
I mean, I've drilled 6 of them, so I'm right there with you.
Yeah. So but I think again, to your point about being comfortable, and I think we had a similar conversation with Brian when I know you're sort of pointing it on this, um, in this category. Now, here's the
Yeah.
thing. I'm going to say it for any control category, right? So whether it's strong control or mid control,
Yeah.
it does absolutely need to be a ball you're confident with or comfortable with. That you know
Yep.
you, and that's where the conversation with Brian and I went around. It was circling around the mid control. You just brought it up here, which is you want the ball that you're most comfortable with. You don't want a ball that you're kind of like, I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm going to be able to hold. I don't know if I'm giving away the puck. If that's the case, then that shouldn't be your control ball,
Yep.
essentially.
Agreed 100%.
Um, so I think that's a good point. And I'm guessing that in terms of usability, you probably can use it a little more often, or might bother using it a little more often than your strong defined, given
Yeah.
what you're seeing on a regular
Absolutely. Yep.
basis. But probably still not a ton, or if it comes into play, maybe it's into play for shorter period of time, is my
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah, and I'll like if I'm coming into a center blind, I'll know within 4 or 5 shots whether these two strong balls, my strong defined and my strong control, I'll know whether they're in play or in play at all,
Yeah.
or if I just need to go to my mid length stuff, which is actually a pretty good segue.
Right, right, yeah, exactly. So then going on to your mid-defined, which I know I think is zero question about. Which is
Yeah, there's
well,
absolutely no question on this one.
yeah, yeah. So talk us through that one. I mean, I think that astrophysics was in my, I think, top five in this category, and I
Yeah.
did explain why it's not in my bag in that category.
No,
But
I mean
why don't you
everybody
tell us
makes
why it's
mistakes
in
sometimes. It's
yours?
okay. No, the astrophysics and before the code black have honestly just brought this really awesome combination of giving me that kind of that big black asim type of reaction, that punch through the pins when the especially when down lane is a little tighter.
Yeah,
But it's not as strong of a cover as, to use another example that came out recently, the nuclear cell from Rotogrip. There I see them as somewhat similar balls, but the nuclear just has a stronger cover to it. And so the R2S Pearl on the astrophysics and the code black gives me a wider range of use, essentially because it's not quite as strong.
yeah,
And again, coming back to the fact that I am mostly on house shot and I have a really high rev rate, I don't need that much help from the ball that often.
yeah,
And so that's why the Astro honestly feels like a turbocharged IQ Emerald for me in a lot of ways.
mhm,
Where it's just like if the IQ is wobbling a little bit down lane and not really picking up and going through the pins right, then I can usually just grab my astrophysics and I'm off to the races.
yeah,
And similarly, if I need to cover a lot of ground directionally, but my strong balls, my Omega and my Axiom are just not storing enough energy, then I can go to the astrophysics and I'm off to the races as well.
yeah,
So even though you might not really think of it this way, the Astro is honestly probably one of my top 2 most used balls right now on house shot. Just because as long as I'm not seeing too much volume in the front part of the lane, there's like 6 different things I can do with it just by tweaking my release and my ball speed a little bit.
yeah.
And it's usually in play and just powering through the pins for me.
Yeah, I can certainly see that, and this is kind of an interesting thing where I and the relativity, I guess, of balls in a bowler's bag, right? So
Yeah.
just because, so we're talking about the astrophysics, it's a pearl ASIM. We know that the cover is a sort of medium strength and maybe medium lower strength these days.
Yeah, I can
Um,
give you that.
so it's clean, it's pretty responsive to friction. So theoretically, it's exactly in this slot, and I even talked about it in this slot.
Yeah.
But if I were to actually put it in my personal bag, I probably would have it in my mid late
Yeah.
because it's essentially a little too long for me with my rev rate. I don't, I'm
Yeah.
going to need less volume to use it with the frequency that you are. So like my nuclear
Yeah,
cell, I can use as frequently just about as you're using your astrophysics in a
yeah,
sense. So I think this is just to sort of get people, thinking about that. There are nuances and it's not just
yeah,
automatically, oh, well, this is a pearl asim, so it fits here, or this is a, solid
yeah.
symmetric and it fits there. It's not always like that.
Absolutely. And I know you and I have talked about this a lot on Discord as well in your Patreon server is the whole metagame of arsenal building for you, a lefty tweener,
Mhm.
versus me, a righty cranker on house shot. Like even just looking, we could be bowling in the same center and be bringing in very different bags night to night
Yep.
for that reason. You're seeing very little traffic, very little transition. So you're going to tend to need those stronger covers. I don't as much because of my rev rate
Yep.
and, usually having at least 5 to 6 people on a pair, I'm
Mhm.
going to see a lot more of that transition over the course of a night of bowling.
Right.
And so I'll need that weaker gear to give me those options, especially for later in a block.
Yep. Yep. Okay. So let's work our way, down the arsenal. So now we're at the
Yeah.
mid control,
Yep.
and you have the IQ Emerald. So again, another ball that similar situation actually. So I'll let you talk about it, and
Yep.
then I'll kind of say my piece on it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So this is actually a pretty recent change for me. I was actually carrying an IQ Tour Solid in this kind of general, like really controlled, surfaced, weaker core ball. Which the IQ Tour core is 249 RG and an 029 diff, so pretty low RG, pretty low differential. So it's not just as my astrophysics creates a big directional change because of the lower diff and the not super strong cover on the IQ Tour series, both of those balls are not going to be creating a big directional change. So especially earlier on in a block where I'm on the fresh and I want to kind of keep things in front of me a little more, both of those balls give me a lot more of that control and kind of trust. Like I was talking about the Axiom, it gives me that same level of trust.
Yeah.
So essentially, the decision point that I have there is the IQ Tour Solid is definitely a little earlier. Is IQ Solid honestly feels like a baby Axiom, for lack of a better term. Like the shapes are kind of similar for me. It's just the IQ Solid is like an arrow weaker, give or take. Versus the IQ Emerald keeps me in that same type of reaction, but just a little more kind of differentiation from the Axiom, especially where it's just a little easier down the lane, but I've got surface on it, so it's still going to read the mid lane and still read the mids and still slow down and kind of arc and roll through the pins
Yeah.
and not be that big directional change like what you get from the astrophysics for me.
And this is, I think, a good another sort of interesting point that I want to hang on to for a moment. So, I mentioned the, let's say, the IQ tour, the web tour, and
Yeah,
even the Hustle Inc. with some surface, for example, as almost like wild card balls for me. But if we stick with the mid control for a moment, right? I think if people just wrap their head around this for a moment, you're a high rev, bowler. You have the IQ or had the IQ tour, and now we're talking about the IQ Emerald with surface in that slot. Same
yeah,
core, just trying to get that medium control shape.
yeah,
I'm sort of the middle of the road bowler, and I have a radical squatch hybrid in there.
yeah,
It's, I mean, look, they're very different balls, right?
yeah,
But they serve purposes depending on the bowler. And then you have the Brian's. Brian's mid control is a rogue assassin.
yeah,
So now you start to sort of picture, with each bowler, essentially you can start to grab at how do you fill your arsenal by thinking through how we do it, right? Depending on the type of bowler we are. So
yeah,
you need less motion because you can create it. So the more motion you can create, the less ball you need. And I mean, it's that
yeah,
straightforward in a sense. And where you go to the spectrum at Brian's game, and he's using I would say a much more aggressive ball that I might I think I mentioned that like the Rogue Assassin could even be a strong control ball potentially.
yeah.
And I think for you, it probably surely would be if you're allowed to throw it.
Oh yeah, no, the Rogue Assassin would that's the Rogue Assassin is a solid one, right?
Yes,
The
yes, it's
the
that
ghost cover, yeah,
solid would
yeah. No,
be
that'd have a huge amount of overlap with the Axiom for me, just in
exactly.
terms of front to back shape.
Yep. Yeah. So I think that's, just a point for people to take away, to really understand when you put something together, you really got to think about your game, not just what the ball is on the shelf and,
Yeah.
what the numbers are. And, so, okay. So then let's move to, I think the next category you had, mid
So we
late.
just got through mid control, so medium late. Yeah.
Right. Right. So that's
Um,
your Hustle Link now.
yep. So I'm on. This is either I think this is my fourth hustle link that I've got in my bag right now. That kind of like that ball. It's a very unique ball because you would look at it on paper and you think, oh, solid cover, medium low RG core is basically an IQ tour.
Mhm.
Not really. It's like 3 feet longer, but it's got this kind of like lopey, boomy arc down lane. And, like you just said a minute ago, I have a lot of rev rate. That rev rate creates shape. I don't need as much help from the ball to create that shape. I almost need to delay the roll phase a little bit more so that my ball is not rolling out and flat tinning when I have to get into like fifth, sixth arrow later in a block.
Mhm.
And so that's where the hustle link comes into play for me. Is I've even gotten as far left as there was one time in a tournament I was sliding on the lane to my left and throwing it 15 feet in the air, landing it on seventh arrow and striking
Yeah.
because there's that much friction. And
Yeah.
it's honestly, the hustle link for me fills a couple different roles in one. For later in a block when there's a lot of friction, the mids are torched, I can just get left and throw it at the spot, and I know it's going to recover. But then also, especially, and I see this a lot when I'm on like HPLs, higher friction synthetic lane surfaces,
Mhm.
is if it's a pattern that doesn't have a ton of volume anyways, I can actually use it as a shape complement to my sanded IQ Emerald and use it in that more, shut down my angles, really roll the ball, keep it in front of me on the fresh.
Mhm.
And so it kind of gives me a different look in that regard as well. Um, and again, this is where building to the bowler and the bowler skill set comes into play as well. And I know you and I have talked about this. Is I don't carry anything weaker than a hustle link because with my ball speed, if I have to throw something weaker than that, I'm probably not winning money anyways. And so at that point, I might as well just hang it up and go home and try again next time.
Yeah.
So that's the ink is the bottom of the bag on the reactive side for me. It's another of those balls that I have a whole lot of trust in because I've thrown it a lot and I know what it's capable of, and it's a shape and a motion that really suits my eye very well.
Right. Right. So that, yeah, I think that's, you know, all good points that you mentioned. And again, I think the hustling seems like a very versatile ball for you, but a ball
Yeah,
that's weak enough that you can do what you have to do. And in one regard, it's sort of beneficial because now you're dealing with five balls, not six, right? I mean,
yeah,
look, anytime we can reduce the variables, it's
yeah,
helpful. And I think we know in practice, the purpose of building an arsenal is to have one, two, three, four, five, whatever options, right?
yeah,
You may be that your house is pretty consistent and you're starting with, I don't know, ball four every time, and great.
yeah,
And then that one time they surprise you with, 3 gallons of oil. You're glad you
yeah,
have, the Omega Crocs with you or whatever ball you have at the top. So I think,
yeah,
that's, I think the point of ultimately, kind of building your arsenal, and for someone like yourself who travels a lot,
yeah,
and seeing a lot of different houses, and so even
yeah,
if it's house shots, I mean, it doesn't matter because ultimately, when we really haven't gotten into it much, and I won't in this video. Topography is important. The lane
yeah,
beds, how the balls are interacting with that particular lane
absolutely.
bed.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, there's other factors that we really haven't gotten into much, but at the end of the day, you just want enough that you can walk in and feel confident.
yeah, and
Right.
that's definitely how I've built this arsenal. Is like you said, I'm traveling to a lot of different centers on a regular basis, and I really wanted to get to a point where, and I feel like I've got this covered really, really well with this setup right now, is know that okay, I'm on a house shot. I can walk in with these five plus my spare ball, and I'm probably going to be able to strike on pretty much anything they put out. And even if I don't have the best look in the building, then I'll at least be able to get close and keep myself in the mix, even if I'm not going to be leading the building with my scoring.
Yeah, yeah, and so then as we, number six, which there's no really big point in talking about for you. It's just it's
Yeah,
your plastic spare ball, right?
yeah,
So I think that's again the point you made, and I think we try to make it all the time with people's spares are crucial. Right? You can throw away
yes,
a lot of pins. You can strike a lot
yeah,
and throw away a lot of pins
yeah,
without making your spares. So make sure that whatever you're doing with your arsenal, this is a recommendation to people, to myself. I mean, at the end of the day, make sure that you can make your spares with whatever you have in
yeah,
your bag. So if you're not one
absolutely,
of those flatten your, wrist out, and you're going to a building and maybe you need to carry the extra one or leave a
yeah,
ball out that you never take with you. Just make sure you have, a good number of balls. But if plastic is your ball for spares, make sure you have that damn ball with you.
yeah. No, absolutely, and that's a very good point to make. Is I obviously throw it pretty hard, but even with that, I'm just better shooting spares, especially 10 pins with plastic.
Yeah,
And so, whether it's flying out to the USBC Open Championships, assuming that happens and I'm able to go out there in June,
yeah,
or, whether it's even, I mean, even on house shots in places where I average like 235 plus, I'm still bringing my spare ball because, there's times where, that extra 10 pins a game from missing a 10 pin in the middle of a string, that could potentially cost, several $100s just from that one single missed spare.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so, even I I remember a really good illustration of this is I think it was EJ Tackett who tweeted after the World Series of Bowling. He tweeted out his
yeah,
stat line from the entire event. He was 95% on all makeable spares for like 60 games or whatever they bowled. And his comment was the most frustrating part of the week was my spare shooting.
right. Exactly.
That's how important spares are.
Yeah, yeah,
And so, if it's important for the best bowlers in the world, then how much more so for us?
yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, we can whack it, but guess what? There's 10 to 12 frames every game, and you're not striking on all of them. And all
And if you
those,
are, then you should be on tour.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So let me move to kind of a little different, kind of expanded topic here. So Brian and I talked about sliding scale when we see sport shots, and I know
yeah,
you're not spending a ton of time on sport shots, but I think regardless of that, you still do spend time traveling, and so sometimes you will add things. So you may not exactly do a sliding scale. I think it's
yeah,
actually good, and where for your game you might not have to. But let's just get into a little bit about what you might do to sort of supplement in case you're going somewhere you haven't seen before, or sport options when you do see it, nationals and so on.
yeah, yeah. So really, I guess I'll tackle nationals first. I think it's going to be a pretty quick topic. At least at this point, my planned bag for nationals this year is honestly almost identical to my starting house shot 6 ball bag. The only real change I was planning on making is actually going back to my IQ tour for that mid control slot. Um, there's a little bit of an assumption happening here. Obviously, doubles singles is going to 4 bowlers on a pair instead of 6. So I'm going to see a little bit less transition there. I'm also assuming that the team pattern is going to hook out of the building like it has for the past 3 years in a row. So team event, I need to carry a couple of smaller core options with me, stuff that's going to really control my down lane motion.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's going to be an IQ Tour Solid and then my Shiny Hustle Link once the IQ starts to hook a little too early. And between those, I'll be able to get the job done with those more than enough. And then, something like Omega Axiom and my Astrophysics, or maybe a Phase 3 or something like that, in as my like higher differential options,
Mm-hmm.
which I tend to like higher differential cores on longer patterns, which the team pattern the past 3 years has been 41, 42 feet somewhere in there in that range, and you're able to kind of shape the pattern a little bit more.
Yeah.
And so that's really not much of a change there. And I'm still, obviously flying out there to Reno. I'm still effectively under a ball limit because of baggage restrictions. I don't want to pay for a third bag. So,
Exactly.
but two is like, even looking back on what we're talking about earlier, is I have a lot of trust and a lot of faith in that setup.
Yeah.
And I'd rather, even if it's not going to cover every single conceivable situation, I'd rather walk in with a simple, dependable bag that I trust and figure out how to make it work in a situation like that.
Yeah, yeah, no, and that makes a lot of sense. I
Yep.
think that's kind of good wrap up of kind of how you established the way you attack the lanes to score, and I guess the belt is the proof that you figured out how to
That's
do it, right?
I guess it's working right. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah,
the belt looks pretty good. So,
yeah, exactly, exactly.
um, no, but if I'm bowling in a local like house shot or local sports shot, subbing in a league or bowling in a sports shot sweeper or something like that, I'll still bring that same starting core six. The Omega, Axiom, Astro, IQ, Emerald, Hustle, Link, Sperry Ball, because that's my core, and I built that be my core.
Yeah,
But then I'll typically augment it with maybe one or two extra pieces. I'll probably bring both my IQ tours, the solid and the emerald, with me, just to have that extra level of control. And maybe over surfacing a weak smooth ball, or over surfacing a mid strength really really smooth ball like the IQ solid might look really good on a pattern. So I have that
right.
option available.
Yep,
And then I'll also add a urethane ball. I don't get to throw it a ton, but something like pitch black or pitch purple, especially on short, you hear pros say it all the time. If urethane is there and you don't have it, you're dead in the water. And so having that option on sport is definitely something I want to have with me if I have the ability to take 7 or 8 balls with me.
yeah,
But in a really really limited situation where I don't think the gutter's going to be in play, like nationals,
right,
then I'm essentially gonna play to my strengths and play to my comforts and figure out how to make that work.
right, right. Cool. All right. Well, thanks for spending some time. Thanks for joining us, and
Yeah,
hopefully,
absolutely.
folks have learned a little something about how we put our bags together, and now you kind of have a representation of high, medium, low rev. So again, for those out there, thanks for watching. Let us know if you have any questions, and we'll be around. We'll continue to sort of keep ourselves busy while we're waiting to
Yeah.
bowl. Thanks for
Yeah, very
joining
much
us.
so. No, thanks for having me on, Tamer. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks, James.
So